Alright, how's it going? So about a week or two ago, I made a video going over all the things I thought Battlefront 2 2005 did better than Battlefront 2 2017. If you're interested in seeing that video and haven't done so already, I'll leave a link in the description. In this video, I'll be doing the exact opposite. I'll be going over everything I think the new one managed to do better. I'd say it's only fair to do so after making that other video. Just like I stated in the last video, these are all my opinions and they are completely subjective. Feel free to disagree, that's completely fine. After all, we're all entitled to our own opinions. All I ask is that we please keep it civil. I'll also state that my bias does lie towards the older game, and I'm completely aware of that. It's one of my favorite games of all time, so of course that's going to be the case. I try to keep my opinions as unbiased as possible, but no matter what, there's always going to be some form of bias present. That's just reality. With that said, there are some things I prefer about the newer game compared to the older one. The list may be short, but nonetheless, it does exist. I will also note that I'm only comparing the base games in this video. If I were to compare them with mods in mind for the older game, the list would be even shorter and far from video worthy. So with that mini disclaimer out of the way, let's get started. I'll start with the obvious, that being visuals. Hopefully those clips say enough, let's move on. Next I'm going to touch on customization. First I'll say that I actually really like the old game's lack of unit customization. It kept everybody on a level playing field and honestly makes you get better at the game itself instead of trying to experiment and figure out the best loadout for each class. So the reason I'm listing customization here is because I actually do enjoy that little bit of experimentation. It's fun using different loadouts and adds another layer of replayability, however small it may be. It's nice that you at least have the option to tinker with your setup if that's your thing, and if not, then you really don't even have to mess with it. Long story short, even if the customization isn't the greatest we've ever seen in a shooter, at least it's present in some form or another. In the previous video, I mentioned that I like the space battles equally between both games, and that still holds true, and I believe they both have their pros and cons. What I like about Battlefront 2 2017 space battles is the action. There's seemingly never a lack of it. There's always a dogfight to be had and always another right around the corner. Overall, I prefer the direction Pandemic went with the older game's approach and prefer the freedom it offers, but without mods, there's just too much dead space, pun not intended. It really feels like they were just ever so slightly too ambitious with them and couldn't quite pull it off. I feel like that was partly, if not completely, because of the technological limitations. Remember, that game is 12 years old now. The next point is quite a minor one, but I do prefer how the force abilities feel in the new game. They actually feel like they have impact and are very satisfying to use. Particularly the force pushes and pulls feel great. I'll also tack this on here. The larger array of force abilities is also nice. You have a bit more to mess around with, and it also helps differentiate the heroes a bit better. Something I feel that the new game pulled off really well is the gunplay, at least on PC. I've heard it's actually quite a bit of a mess on consoles, but I can't actually vouch for that since personally I've only played the game on PC. I find the gunplay pretty fun and satisfying. It's sort of the same thing as with the force abilities. Each blast round really feels like it has impact, which is great. The best way I can describe the gunplay is, it feels a lot more like Battlefield than Call of Duty, basically a lot less arcade-like. Pretty much every blaster is actually pretty fun to use and effective. Sure, there are some that are better than others, namely the CR2, but for the most part, weapon balance feels pretty good. That's not to say the weapon balance was bad in the old game, but it was almost kind of non-existent in a way since each class only had one primary weapon. Next, I'll briefly touch on the class system. This point is a tie between both games for me. Each game went about their class system in pretty different ways, but I feel like both pull them off pretty well. What I like about the new game system is how every class has its specific advantages and disadvantages, but are still useful enough in all situations. You can easily argue that it's a flawed system because of that, but I personally kinda like it. For the second to last point, I'll touch on the multiplayer experience as a whole. I'm a little hesitant about including this just because I think it has a lot more to do with the leap in available technology rather than the game design, but nonetheless, it still is something the new game pulled off a bit better. Multiplayer in the old game wasn't bad by any means, but it was fairly rough around the edges and still is now. That's not exactly the biggest knock against the game though, since most multiplayer games of that time were kinda rough, at least by today's standards. I'd say the overall multiplayer experience of the new game is better, up until the rubber banding problems that is, but I'm sure that will be sorted out pretty quickly if it hasn't already been taken care of by the time this is uploaded. The gameplay is smoother, hit detection feels pretty good, and it imparts a pretty strong and enjoyable Star Wars experience on the user. That's not to say it's perfect, it definitely still has a long way to go. It needs some tweaks here and there definitely needs to be some form of server browser, or at least a way we can pick a specific era. That being said, the multiplayer experience is pretty good. Then again, it really should be since this game heavily focuses on the multiplayer aspect. Again, I do think that last point has more to do with the gap in available technology. After all, Battlefront 2 2005 is 12 years old. And last but not least is quite literally the butts. Our boys in blue or even Ayla Sakura got nothing on that. That's pretty much all I have on this topic. Please do let me know what you agree with and disagree with. Please just keep it civil. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.